Welcome to This Explainer. Man, I'm thrilled you're here today because we are going to unpack one of the most famous events in human history, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. Now, you know the basic story, right? The so-called unsinkable ship strikes an iceberg on its maiden voyage back in 1912 and goes down in the freezing North Atlantic. But today, we're looking way beyond the surface. We're going to dig into the incredibly layered mysteries, the forgotten testimonies, and the modern science that reveals a much more complicated truth about what really doomed this magnificent vessel. All right, let's dive right into this.
Was an iceberg truly the only culprit? Look, we've been taught for over a century that a giant block of ice was the absolute sole villain of this story. But history is rarely that simple. Before we go any further, I want you guys to jump in. Head down to the comments section right now and tell me what you believe really sank the Titanic. Was it literally just the iceberg? Was it human arrogance? Maybe a mechanical failure? Let me know what you think, because what we're about to uncover might just completely flip your perspective. To understand this disaster, we first got to look at how it was originally investigated. Section 1, the 1912 British Inquiry.
Right after the tragedy, amid mass public outrage and, honestly, total confusion, the British Board of Trade initiated a massive official inquiry. It was overseen by High Court Judge Lord Mersey. They actually held the hearings mainly in the London Scottish Drill Hall. Now, this was a massive venue chosen specifically for the huge crowds, which, ironically, had terrible acoustics. It made it incredibly hard to hear the tragic testimonies being given. The investigation spanned 42 intense days. From May 2nd to July 30th, 1912, this inquiry absolutely consumed London. It was the longest and most detailed court of inquiry in British history up to that point. It cost nearly £20,000, which, to put that into perspective, is over £1 million in today's money. Nearly 100 witnesses were called to the stand. That includes surviving crew members like Second Officer Charles Lightoller and White Star Line officials like J. Bruce Ismay. Together, they answered more than 25,000 questions just to establish the historical baseline of what actually went wrong.
But during those 42 days, a much darker narrative started to emerge. Section 2, the SS Californian controversy.
So the SS Californian was another ship operating in the North Atlantic that night, and it was bafflingly close to the sinking Titanic. Yet, they didn't come to the rescue. The American inquiry had already flagged this, but the British inquiry brought it center stage. It created a massive public controversy around the sheer inaction of the Californian's crew. When asked point blank why they totally ignored the Titanic's distress rockets, Second Officer Herbert Stone testified, "I did not think the ship was in distress at the time." He stated that if there were grounds for it, his captain, Stanley Lord, would have said so. It's just a devastating display of human error, miscommunication, and perhaps an incredibly intimidating chain of command. But as we'll see, human error might not be the whole story.
Which brings us to Section 3, the hidden variables.
For decades, the findings of Lord Mersey's 1912 inquiry were pretty much accepted as gospel. It was the classic story of a ship going way too fast, ignoring ice warnings, and a nearby ship completely failing to help. But modern science and some serious historical deep dives have started to paint a very different picture. We're going to transition away from those human elements established in 1912 and investigate the surprising modern scientific theories that explain exactly why these catastrophic errors and failures happened. The 1912 official findings centered on navigation errors, excessive speed, and that infamous iceberg collision. But modern scientific theories point to some crazy hidden culprits: structural damage from a coal fire, deadly optical illusions, and brittle iron metallurgy. The Titanic wasn't just unlucky, it was sailing right into a highly complex trap. Let's break these modern theories down, one by one.
First up is Section 4, the coal fire theory.
This is an absolutely fascinating piece of the puzzle. It was actually mentioned during the 1912 inquiry, but was largely brushed aside at the time. Modern historians have revisited this and suggest it played a critical, maybe even fatal role in the sinking. According to this theory, a smoldering fire began on the Titanic's coal stores about 10 days before the ship even departed Southampton, and it just kept burning for several days into the maiden voyage. Now, why does this matter? Well, this ongoing, intense heat is theorized to have severely weakened the structural integrity of two bulkheads and the hull itself. And tragically, this weakened area was in the exact same section of the ship that the iceberg would later strike. Combine a seriously weakened hull with the ship's excessive speed, and you've got a recipe for structural failure long before the ice was even spotted.
Let's move on to Section 5, the deadly optical illusion.
Before we look at the science here, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you're the lookout on the Titanic. You're staring out into the freezing, pitch-black North Atlantic horizon. You're trusting your eyes, but all you are actually seeing is a completely false mirage. What would you do? Drop a comment and let me know how you'd react if you found out your eyes were literally playing tricks on you in a life-or-death situation. It's a terrifying thought, right? Well, the science behind what likely happened to those lookouts is called thermal inversion. This is an atmospheric condition where a layer of extremely cold air becomes trapped below a layer of warmer air. This abnormal layering actually acts like a giant lens, bending the light and creating false horizons, or mirages. On the night of April 14, 1912, the freezing waters of the Labrador Current collided with the much warmer Gulf Stream, creating the absolute perfect conditions for a massive thermal inversion.
The tragic consequence of that thermal inversion was a false horizon that literally concealed the iceberg from the Titanic's lookouts until it was just way too late to turn. But wait, it actually gets worse. Remember the SS Californian and Herbert Stone's testimony? This exact same mirage effect visually distorted the Titanic's distress rockets. To the crew of the Californian, the Titanic didn't look like a massive ship sinking. The light was so warped that the rockets looked incredibly low and harmless. A simple trick of the light doomed both the lookouts and the potential rescue. Absolutely wild.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Flawed Iron and Engineering. The Titanic was heralded as the absolute pinnacle of modern engineering, the unsinkable ship. But deep within its very skeleton lay a hidden vulnerability that no one back in 1912 could have fully understood. The scientific culprit here is known as brittle fracture. Basically, it's the sudden, rapid structural failure of a material under stress, especially in freezing temperatures, without any prior bending or deformation. Modern metallurgical analysis of the Titanic's recovered rivets showed a super high concentration of slag, which is just a byproduct of smelting. When those wrought iron rivets hit the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, they didn't just bend under the impact of the iceberg, they completely lost all their flexibility. They literally snapped and shattered like fragile glass, popping the steel plates wide open.
So when we put it all together, we're really looking at the anatomy of a perfect storm. The Titanic wasn't just destroyed by one single thing. It was a massive, cascading failure. They ignored ice warnings and sailed at excessive speed. The hull was likely already compromised by a raging coal fire. A thermal inversion created mirages that hid the ice and totally confused the only ship that could have saved them. And when the strike finally happened, the freezing temperatures caused the ship's very iron rivets to snap like glass. It was this incredibly complex culmination of fire, ice, mirages, and weak metallurgy.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty chilling question. If the grandest, most unsinkable ship of its era was ultimately doomed by a microscopic flaw in its iron and a simple trick of the light in the atmosphere, how fragile is the modern engineering that you and I rely on every single day? It really makes you think twice about our own technological arrogance, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive explainer. Don't forget to like, comment with your thoughts on that final question, and subscribe for more explainers just like this one. See you next time.